August 30th, 2012, Eric Rhodes is celebrating the 37th anniversary of his 21st birthday. And more importantly than that, 20 years ago, Eric, you launched Radio Ink magazine. What's up with that?
Yeah.
What were you thinking?
Well, it really, the 20 years is kind of a misnomer because we changed the name to Radio Ink 20 years ago. We owned the magazine, which we had purchased and operated for 3 years, The Pulse of Radio, and it was 3 years old when we bought it, so it's really 26 years old. But yeah, 20 years of Radio Ink.
20 years of Radio Ink. And so 26 years ago, when you decided that you needed to be a publisher of radio industry information, what were you thinking?
I wasn't thinking. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I think that one thing I've learned over the last few years is that things happen by accident and work out. I was an advertiser in the Pulse of Radio.
Right.
I had received a phone call from a guy by the name of Dale Tucker. He said, you need to advertise these giant boom boxes. That was a company I had. They were remote studios that looked like big radios. He said, you need to advertise them in the Pulse of Radio. Everybody's reading it. I said, well, I've never heard of it. I've been around the industry for a while. He said, well, everybody's reading it, and the circulation is 20 million. And I said, well, how much is an ad? And he said, $6,000. I said, oh, $6,000? He says, well, I'll do it for $2,000. So the minute he dropped his rate, I just kept negotiating, and I ended up buying 5 ads for $100 a piece.
Gee.
Probably shouldn't say that. So I bought all these ads in the Pulse of Radio, and I didn't get any results, and I was in New York for another meeting, so I went and met with the editor, Tom Chauvin.
Of course you're mad about the loss of the $500.
Yes, of course.
All right, yeah.
So I met with the publisher. His name is Tom Chauvin, and nice enough guy, a real radio geek. You know, we had a lot in common, and he started giving me all these reasons why my ads wouldn't work, and it was my fault, and probably was. In reality, I didn't have good ads, but we just kind of bonded. And then after that bonding experience, he says, well, let me tell you the real reason they're not working. And I said, well, what's the real reason? He said, well, the owner of this magazine's really not very committed to it, and he's not putting money into it. He says, I'm literally buying stamps and licking them and putting them on the magazines myself, and we're only sending out 200 copies. And I said, well, okay, then I'd like my $500 back, and I'm sorry I can't do that. So I walked out of the office, and he was officing at the time in this big skyscraper in New York because Bob Sillerman owned the magazine. And he had taken over the magazine because of some acquisition that it was part of, and so it continued to operate, but he obviously wasn't committed. So on a whim, I went into his assistant and I said, I'd like to meet with Bob Sillerman. And oh no, he's very busy. And I said, I'm a disgruntled advertiser and I insist. Is he here? And she said, well, just a minute. She came back, she said, he'll see you for 5 minutes. So I walked in, saw him for 5 minutes. I told him this story, and he says, yeah, we're not really very committed to it. He said, we took it over, and we don't know what to do with it. I said, well, I'll take it off your hands. So we negotiated a deal, and I bought the magazine, and I had no background or business being in the magazine business, but it seemed like a good idea at that moment.
Big turning point. So you limp along, you fart around, you learn some things. After you take over this magazine, what do you think was the event, the connection, the moment when you begin to get some traction and some momentum?
The verge of bankruptcy. I didn't know anything about the magazine business. Somebody talked me into hiring them, and we ended up hiring 50 people for a radio trade magazine. And I quickly burned through a couple of $1 million in cash, and I went in one morning, and my bookkeeper came to me. He said, Eric, you're going to be bankrupt in 6 weeks. And I was just spending money like a drunken sailor. So I went in and I fired everybody except for a couple of people. And I didn't know anything about the magazine business. I thought I was, a big shot, and I was just letting somebody else run it. And so I really got in, and I got involved, and I started running it myself. I had been writing columns, but I wasn't running it. And that was the reality that I needed. I had to get kicked in the teeth. I had to save it because I had sold my radio stations, made some money. I put all of that money into this, and if I didn't fix it, I was going to be in trouble. So I fixed it, and that got me involved, and that really is what forced me to get out into the industry at a higher level. And so that was probably one of the biggest events. I think the other big event, there was a period of time when the National Association of Broadcasters was promoting the idea of going digital. And I had been writing some columns and controversial columns and so on, and I hired a guy to evaluate the systems for me because I didn't know anything about the technology. And NAB is really promoting this DAB system, which is what was being used in Europe. And I came out against it. I said it was a bad idea, and the biggest reason I came out against it is because NAB had a piece of the action.
Oh.
And I said that they couldn't be objective and they were feathering their own nest, and so I came out against it. And quite frankly, I was really surprised because it completely disrupted it. It completely stopped it. And,
you had a little more power than you realized.
Yeah, well, it made me realize that people were paying attention.
Oh, wow.
And something like that really happened recently again, too. About a year and a half ago, I came out against something with the whole music licensing thing. And I didn't realize it, but I was told later by somebody that it stopped it.
Wow.
And so now I have to be really careful about what I write because you don't really realize, when you're sitting down writing something in heat or passion of the moment.
You need to think it through.
Yeah,
sure.
It can disrupt lives.
Question, favorite cover? 20 years of Radio Ink, do you have a favorite cover?
Phil Hartman.
When was that?
Well, I don't remember the year, but it was, we had done, that News Radio had done a segment on Radio Ink, and we dummied up a cover with a giant logo so it would stand out. We even sold the back cover so that that advertiser would be on TV. And so we were on News Radio. We went out, we met the actors, we met Phil Hartman, and then shortly thereafter, Phil Hartman was murdered. And so we put him on the cover. So I think that was my favorite.
What is your biggest fear about the radio business as it faces the future? What's the biggest mistake on the horizon? What's the biggest threat? What do you think is the biggest hole we're probably about to step into?
I tend to be a little bit ahead of the curve on some of these things. For instance, when I went into internet radio, I was 10 years too early.
Right.
And maybe 20 years too early.
Right.
But that thing eventually happens. I think my biggest fear for the radio industry is that the mentality of the people who run and operate most radio companies, big and small, is something isn't making money today, we won't invest in it until it's making money. And so the theory is, I do this conference called Convergence, and I try to get all the great minds to come in to help the radio people open up their minds. And I think the problem that they're having, or we're having in the radio industry, is that we believe that we can get on the bandwagon late, and when something starts happening and something starts making money and something starts producing, we can still jump in and there's still time. I don't believe that. That's exactly what happened to the newspaper business, and it's exactly what killed the newspaper business. So we are so much believing in our medium, and I believe in our medium, but we have this mentality of, we've had attacks before, it's the old, the CB radio is going to kill us, and then it was the cassette, and then it was the CD, and then it was the cell phone, and none of these things have ever killed us, and it was TV, and it was FM, and it was, all of these technologies. The difference is now that everybody has a mobile phone, and that almost everybody, 84% of America, has high-speed internet, and everything's changing. And so we have to be in a position where we continue to believe in what we're doing, but we have to have disruptive technology. And other people are disrupting. Pandora is disrupting. And whether or not Pandora ends up being the end-all be-all, the numbers are pretty staggering. The listening numbers are pretty high. And radio looks at these things and says, it'll never happen. It's really just a fad. It's going to be short-lived. And maybe it is. But there will be something, and there will be a time that isn't. And then suddenly, click, radio will dramatically be transformed, and they won't know what hit them. If I were running a Clear Channel or a CBS or something, I would hire some of the 10 brightest minds I could find, put them in a room, fund them, and say, put me out of business. Find a technology, find a play that's going to put radio out of business, and I want to own it.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if you build something internally in a corporate environment, it always has the strings of the corporate. If you read the book, The Innovator's Dilemma, it basically says no one is ever able to invent anything new within a big corporation, or very, very rarely. And it takes a small skunkwork type of a group outside.
True story. Did you know that the quartz movement in wristwatches that was championed by Japan and took over watches worldwide was actually developed by the Swiss in Switzerland? The Swiss watch companies developed the quartz watch movement. And they said, hang on a second, we don't want this. We employ 60,000 watchmakers here in Switzerland. And if we use this, we don't need these 60,000 watchmakers. We're in the mechanical watch business. So they sold the technology to the Japanese, who then unemployed the 60,000 Swiss watchmakers.
What's going to happen anyway?
But what I'm saying is they did have the wit to create the disruptive technology. They just didn't have the foresight to continue to own it. In other words, I hear what you're saying. Whatever frightens you the most, do it to yourself before someone else does. Because if you do it to yourself, you stay in charge. A company made oak buckets when people dropped buckets down wells. They were the top oak bucket company in the world.
That's easy for you to say.
Oak bucket company. And so the day comes when people started having indoor plumbing. But we're the top oak bucket company in the world. And so they didn't realize, no, they're not an oak bucket company. They're in the water delivery business. So they didn't invest in faucets. They didn't invest in pipes. And they went out of business. And I hear that's what you're saying about radio. We need to figure out what really, truly is the biggest threat so that we can own that.
Yep. And I think we're ignoring it. Rob Curley is a brilliant internet strategist who speaks at our Convergence conference every year. One of the funniest men, very entertaining. He worked for the Washington Post. He's brilliant. When he was at the Washington Post, and at very early stages in the newspaper business with the internet, the editors, the publishers would say to them, that story can't be online until it's been in the newspaper. And that's what killed them. Wow. In other words, they weren't willing to cannibalize themselves. Radio has to be willing to cannibalize themselves. The technology is moving too fast. All internet usage is moving in the direction of the mobile, the smartphone. Almost 50% of all internet usage now is on the smartphone. The smartphone has, my smartphone has 64,000 radio stations on it. I can go into TuneIn and get 64,000 radio stations anywhere in the world, and I can be driving down the car on the road listening to a radio station in New Zealand. Radio stations are fighting this technology, levying lawsuits against companies like this and saying, well, you're stealing our content. No, they're aggregating their content. They're giving you audiences. Well, the mentality of some of the people in the radio industry is we don't want to stream and have people listening out of market. But think about how many people are out of market every day. Look at how busy your airports are. And if I want to know what's going on with my sports team, I want to be able to listen on my smartphone or watch my local TV on my smartphone. And so just because someone's listening in Paris doesn't mean you're out of market. Well, we don't want to pay for it. Understandable. We can't monetize it. Eventually, there will be ways to monetize it. So I think these aggregators like TuneIn and iHeart are critically important. I also think that the dash and the automobile is going to go through a major change. Now, there was a story in the New York Times Magazine about 3 weeks ago, and it said that there is the automotive business is going to see the biggest year in the history of the automotive business in 2015. The average car fleet now is 11 years old. People haven't been spending money. They've been sitting back and sitting on their cars. So now, 11 years old. And by the way, I'm driving two 11-year-old cars myself.
Wow.
And so, and I've been thinking about, gee, these things are starting to sound a little rough. It's going to be time to buy a new car in a couple of years. So their research says that every car, 70% of the fleet of the United States is going to turn over in 2015. Wow. 70%. Wow. So this is going to be the biggest year in car history in terms of sales. Now, what has happened to the dashboard of the new car? You look at the dashboard, almost all new cars by 2015 are internet enabled, have Pandora on the dash, have TuneIn on the dash, and have iHeart on the dash. Now, some of them, they say, won't even have an actual FM radio or AM radio in it, but will only be able to access that radio by internet. And of course, if you've driven a car that has the, you get into the car, it automatically finds your iPhone and ties into the Bluetooth. It's in your pocket. You don't even have to plug it in. And now it's become, it's pulling in your music and your data, and you're pressing buttons on your dashboard and you can listen. That environment changes everything. Radio has owned the automobile. We've had a monopoly on the automobile. It's been the sole source of news and entertainment. We are losing that by 2015. So what's that mean? If your brand isn't on these internet aggregators, if you don't have tremendous loyalty from your audience, if they can't find you online, what are they going to do? They're going to go somewhere else.
Do you have any final thoughts before I tell you how we're going to wrap this up and what I'm giving you for your birthday?
Yeah, I do want to tell you one other thing about the car.
Go.
Norman Bushnell, who invented Atari, very bright futurist, came to our Convergence conference. And he said, one thing is going to disrupt radio more than any other. He said, the Google car. The Google car is a self-driving car. Look up the video online and look at the Google car video. It's driven 250,000 miles without an accident. People can step out in front of it. It won't hit them. And the state of Nevada has licensed this technology. They say by 2015, all of the taxi cabs in Las Vegas will be self-driving cars. The auto manufacturers are ramping up, going to be producing about 150,000 of them by 2015. The insurance companies are behind it, will drop insurance rates by 50% if you're in a self-driving car. Within 20 years, he believes the self-driving car is everywhere. Imagine this, a Google video, you've got a blind man who gets in the car, speaks the address into the machine, and it drives him there, and he gets out. So imagine the elderly, how it changes their lives. You put your kids in the car, you punch in the address, your kids are delivered to where you want them to go. Now suddenly, you're not driving, you're not paying attention. Your car becomes just another living room, a place where you have leisure time. If you're driving somewhere for a long distance as the driver, now you can watch a video. So it's going to change the dynamics of the radio industry. The other thing it will do is it will cut down traffic time. Because in a perfect world where all cars are driving exactly the same speed, synchronized, there are no traffic jams. So one of the great benefits to radio right now is drive time. You know, the average drive time in Los Angeles is high. That's going to go down.
Now, here's what's interesting. You just sharpened the point I was about to make. My gift to you is we're going to leave and go to lunch with Jeffrey Eisenberg, and the discussion is going to be big data. Now, to give the viewers an understanding of what big data means, number one, according to IBM, if you digitized every book, every magazine feature, column that's ever been written in the history of the world, if you digitized every photograph, every movie, every piece of information that's ever been created, if it was digitized, it would only be, everything prior to August of 2010 would be 10% of the data in the world today. In other words, 90% of all the data on Earth has been created in the past 2 years.
It's all new.
In the past 2 years.
Right.
Now, big data is a thing that's being done right now by the biggest companies and organizations, and they're taking everything that you've been talking about, everything, everything from GPS locations from smartphones. They're taking cash register data, credit card data. They're taking temperature readings from climate sensors all over the world. I mean, this is what it's called is I forget the word for it, but its data has nothing to do with each other. It is unstructured data. It's unstructured. It's just random, massive. I mean, a terabyte is like a tiny little bit.
Yeah.
It's like, it's this vast quintobytes of data. And they put in these unbelievably big, fast computers. Google recently put together 16,000 in their X labs, put together 16,000 computer processors.
Right.
And the computer recognized cats, having never been taught there's such a thing as a cat. They realized computers can do independent learning.
Right.
Now, if you take that idea and you said, if we give this data, the bigger the data set, the more obvious the patterns. It's a practical application of chaos theory. And the things that are being done and the things that are being learned that were unforeseeable. Now, here's the interesting thing. Radio has that opportunity. And if someone in leadership understood how to access the secrets contained in big data, they're very predictive, very disruptive, very instructive. And this is brand new. I mean, this is only months old. And the guy who right now is leading the way to figure out new ways to use big data for organizations like us is Jeffrey Eisenberg. And so I know that this is the kind of thing you like to be on top of.
Absolutely.
And this is the top guy in the world that can probably give you all kinds of insights about possibilities, okay? And we may even make another video after you've had lunch and have had a few days to process all this.
All right.
Give your fans and well-wishers on your birthday a few parting words, Eric.
Well, I think I need to start one place, and that is that I was reminiscing on the way over here. I'm speaking this next week. I think we both are.
Yeah, I'm going with you.
In Orlando. And you and I met because I spoke at a Christian radio broadcasters meeting, and I took my clothes off on stage. And this guy came up to me afterwards. He said, if you are like that, you need to know Roy. And I called you, you called me, I don't know. We were introduced. We became fast friends. And you and I have done some pretty cool things together over the years, and you've been writing for Radio Inc. all this time. You're our #1 writer. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate the opportunity.
Let's keep it going. We have an industry that, my staff wanted to put together this 20-year anniversary of radio because they saw it as an opportunity, and I think it's a good thing. But the one thing on the staff meeting I reiterated is it's not about the last 20, it's about the next 20. And as far as I'm concerned, the only thing that matters is what have you done for me lately? And it's real easy to get more complacent when you're more comfortable, when you've made some money, and that's when things are most dangerous. When you're thinking about, gee, I'm going to retire in 5 years or 10 years, you're not going to work as hard maybe, and you're not going to think as much. And there's just so much activity brewing around us, and so much technology, and so many great minds, and everything has changed dramatically. And so really the next 20, but 20 is too long. I mean, really it's about the next 1 or 2 years initially, because things will change that fast. The industry that we live in is going to change dramatically in 2, 3, 4 years. And you think about some of these influences like the 2015 problem. We have to figure that out today, because we've only got essentially 2 or 3 years to fix that problem and to make sure that we are cemented so that when I have 64,000 choices in my car, I already have those 64,000 on my iPhone. And what's interesting is I listen to the same 3 or 4 radio stations.
Yeah.
And, I think that in terms of parting thoughts, we have a lot of people in the industry who are really sweating a lot about, they're not letting go of the past. And they're not letting go of the past because the past was wonderful. It was a lot of fun for old guys like us, to grow up in a radio industry and be on the air at 14 or 15 years old and entertain people and go through, all the fun the radio industry used to be an industry of thousands and thousands of independent craftsmen. You know, we were like people who ran or operated private restaurants, and we could cook and change the menu every week according to what people wanted. And then McDonald's came in, or some Mandola, some big corporation came in and took over. Well, the radio industry is in that state. And I hear a lot of people pining for the past. And it's fun to remember the past. I love the past. There were a lot of great times. But we have to be rooted in reality. We have to adapt. And it doesn't mean that what is being done is necessarily the right thing. I mean, there are a lot of people making a lot of mistakes. But if we get rooted in reality and we're willing to accept it and try to figure out ways to bring some of those magical elements back to the industry in this environment, then radio will continue to survive. Radio doesn't matter as a delivery of mechanism. What radio matters is as a content mechanism. So we're really about content, no matter how it's delivered, whether it's through a podcast or an internet or a cell phone or otherwise, and we really should be everywhere. We shouldn't be just thinking about our transmitters, but we're hung up on our transmitters just like book publishers are hung up on their books. And you know, the world out there is Kindle now, and if you're not in Kindle or you're not on iPad, then you're nowhere. So I think that we as a radio industry need to be kind of thinking about that. And the reality is that, you know, consolidation will get worse. There will be more consolidation that occurs, and then it'll all break up. And 20 years from now, when we're having this conversation, it will be a different business again.
Let's hope that we have that opportunity. We'll talk to you guys soon about big data.
Great. Thanks.
Bye-bye.